Hello guys, Jeff from Wccftech, and we're going to be reviewing Cross of the Dutchman. Cross of the Dutchman is an interesting game because it's actually historical, surprising enough, you may not believe it, and it's inspired by the true story of a Frisian legend, Pierre Gerolf's Donia, later known as Groot Pierre, leader of the Armoer Zwart Hoop. Of course, I don't know how to say that. However, you get the gist of that. They were a band of rebels and pirates that were fighting against the Habsburg Netherlands from 1515 to 1523. That, however, is where the historical accuracy actually sort of ends, aside from the fact that they mention a 7-foot sword that he had, which, interestingly, is actually real. It's true, he had a 7-foot sword, and it's still on display in the Netherlands, oddly enough. With a lot of games, it really is difficult to justify the line, inspired by a true story, as inevitably the developers will just want you to do the usual busywork that acts as a filler in almost every game out there. In games with their own worlds and stories, this can be written in and justified as is necessary. In a story based on real events, it's hard to imagine the hero of the land having the traipse back and forth doing menial work to prove himself to the townspeople, or to smash crates and search for random treasure chests to build up the funds needed to improve his or her weaponry. But ultimately, that is what's happening here. So aside from all those historical inaccuracies, Cross of the Dutchman is a reasonably short story of Pierre as he rises up to fend for the average person. As his success builds, people join him, and the creation of his militia is shown prior to the events that spurred him into his actions in real life, which of course depict him as somebody out there to help the local people here, and it was a regional choice, as it gave the game missions to send Pierre on, rather than just simply telling the story of revenge that wouldn't really have been able to carry the game to any real length. It would have been limited, I suppose. This game took about 4.5 hours to complete, and we've killed close to 1,000 soldiers, the majority with Pierre's giant fists, of course, because it's more fun that way, as you're not really given a weapon until quite late on, unfortunately, and it's kind of difficult to get that 7-foot sword, which would be fun to have. Not that using his fist, of course, against heavily armored soldiers is really much of a detriment. It's actually kind of fun, and of course, the special moves have a tendency to send them flying around like confetti. It's quite simple, really. Never exactly great, but never noticeably bad either. Even being limited to 8 special moves, 4 for fists and 4 for the sword obtained later, it never becomes too dull. It's kind of fun, at least. What is a huge disappointment, however, is that out of all the thousands of enemies that you're going to be fighting in this game, there's only really 6 types. You get the normal, veteran, and officer soldiers alongside normal, veteran, and officer archers, and that's it. And the only way to differentiate them is by their hair and armor color, and that they take a few extra hits and do a little more damage as well. There is actually one other character you fight, the only boss fight really of the game, but we're not going to include it because the character never dies and he kind of instantly joins you anyway because the fight was just a case of mistaken identity. How weird. And much like the lack of character models, there's also a lack of environments to actually explore. Throughout the 9 chapters, you only visit 6 different areas, none of them exactly huge and sprawling. And you'll see 2 villages, a few farms, and 1 or 2 other buildings surrounded by grass, a huge number of wooden barrels and boxes, and a surprising number of treasure chests in the mandatory video game collection quest, where you smash everything up to collect as much loot as you can. Sometimes you go to an area at night, sometimes the place has been set on fire, and sometimes it's during the day. You'll never find yourself excited to go to a new area at all. Now, Triangle Games apparently is aware that there's not exactly a huge amount of variety to be found in both the gameplay and the visuals, and so to fix that, they've added on some stealth missions that don't exactly fit in with the rest of the game. It's a bit out of place here. Pierre is effectively a cross between a man and a great bear, yet instead of smashing the skulls of a few soldiers as he has hundreds of times before, he decides he needs to sneak. He needs to get into sneaky bear mode and crawl along the ground, so to speak. And the problem here is that the stealth system is actually quite terrible. Soldiers walk around the dark, they hold lanterns, and where the perception of the surrounding ends in sort of a line with the light given off by the lantern, disregarding the sound that would be made by a man the size of Pierre and his gigantic bare feet, and that humans can actually see in the dark a little bit, the stealth system is just a game of luck for the most part. All but one of the stealth missions are timed, often too short of a limit anyway, and in our experience, even staying out of the light will have you caught anyway. So when the stealth missions end up being our trial and error as you repeatedly run them to remember the soldiers' patterns to find a way to beat them that way. More annoying is when one ends in the middle of the map and Pierre quite literally decides that sneaking isn't worth it, decides to charge it anyway. So what was the point of all those stealth missions? The saving grace for Cross the Dutchman is that the aesthetic style is very colorful and very animated and very fun. So even though the areas kind of look the same and whatnot, they're never offensive to look at. It actually looks good. It's gorgeous, in fact. The point where this really shines, however, is in the cutscenes or the character portraits. The art style is just really very unique. And I can't really remember ever seeing characters with such strange faces and features on them like this. And it can seem so out of place at times, although it's absolutely hilarious when a character, kind of looks at you abjectly, terrified when the story doesn't really call for it. It's kind of funny. But the uniqueness and the fact that it's so colorful makes it attractive. In all, Cross the Dutchman is a decent little game. It's a testament to the enjoyment of combat that, despite the fact there's only 2 enemy models, really, and 6 total character models like that, and just 8 special attacks, it's able to carry the game through. Even with part or perhaps even majority of the game taken up by treasure hunting or simply running backwards and forwards between the same areas, the game feels brief enough to not overstay its welcome. So it's not too bad. So Cross the Dutchman is a short game. It does have a bit of padding in there, but the usual setting and story behind it, with reasonably entertaining comments, is to make it worth trying out. Cheap, cheerful, and entertaining. It's worth at least having a look. I'm Jeff for Wccftech Reviews.